Well, stocks took a beating today as investors grow increasingly concerned about a global trade war. The Dow was down more than 300 points at the close, but it sure doesn't look like those fears are going anywhere. In fact, the trade spat between the U.S. and China may be about to escalate yet again. The Trump administration is expected to bar many Chinese companies from investing in American technology firms and to block additional U.S. technology exports to China. That's according to media reports by the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg. An announcement on that file is expected on Friday. But in a tweet this morning, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said the move will not be specific to China. Instead, it will target all countries that are, quote, trying to steal American technology. Meanwhile, Trump's moves to protect American companies may be backfiring. We're already seeing the fallout of the steel tariffs recently introduced by the U.S. A nail manufacturer in Missouri has lost 50% of its business since the announcement, and it may be forced to close down entirely by Labor Day. Bigger brands are also being hurt. Harley-Davidson Motorcycles says it will shift some production and jobs from the U.S. to factories in Europe. This in response to tariffs imposed by the European Union on American imports. Tariffs on Harleys have jumped from 6% to 31%. Now, as Harley-Davidson moves production to Europe, other U.S. vehicle makers are watching closely as Donald Trump threatens auto tariffs. Trade barriers would be bad news for American manufacturers such as GM and Ford. Both rely on imports for parts and finished products. But according to a report from Moody's, it wouldn't just hurt U.S. makers, it would damage the industry on a global level. Joining us now is the author of that report. Bruce Clark is a senior vice president at Moody's. Bruce, how bad could this get?
Well, we haven't dimensioned how bad it can get, but we have taken a pretty close look at the entire global sector, and our conclusion is that whether you're a U.S. auto manufacturer, a European auto manufacturer, Japanese or Korean, or even a parts supplier or a retailer in the States, the tariff situation can harm every one of those companies.
And just walk us through that, because I think there's not a ton of education around specifically how tariffs work. I mean, tariffs are just a fancy word for a tax. We understand that, I think, at a very basic level. But if it was to hit the auto industry, I guess what your report is saying that it goes way beyond just the auto industry. How does that happen, and how far and wide would the economic consequences reach?
Okay, well, the thing people need to understand about the auto sector, it is a very broad, very well-integrated system. During the time of the potential bankruptcy of Ford and GM, people began to realize that those kinds of problems ripple through a very wide swath of the economy. If you talk about tariffs on U.S. cars, that's going to flow through to the supplier network. A lot of suppliers will relocate to operate where the manufacturer has a facility. There are a lot of U.S. parts suppliers who have facilities in Mexico. To the extent tariffs go into place, it's going to impact them. A lot of major car dealerships sell foreign cars. They sell a lot of European, Japanese cars. They make up a very large portion of their business. Tariffs would affect them. So this is a situation where it's not simply a matter of putting a tariff on the four-wheeled vehicle that comes in. It affects many parts of the economy, and there's a very large and very broad supply chain.
And I mean, the auto industry it's like the perfect model for a global integrated supply chain. We've spent 3 decades trying to make it more fluid and more adaptable. And now we have the situation where, you know, the reports say a car or parts of a car over the course of its production would cross a border between Mexico, Canada, and the United States as many as 9 times just over the course of its own production. How on earth could we actually implement? I mean, what would tariffs really look like? Would you apply tariffs every time it crosses the border? At sometimes it crosses the border? On what % of U.S. goods? I mean, how would these even work?
I got to tell you, those are some of the details that really have to be worked out, and you know, oftentimes the devil is in the detail. But I have to tell you that at the end of the day, whether you talk to the manufacturers, the suppliers, the car dealerships, all of them see themselves being hit negatively by the potential of these tariffs. And when we go down and do our own work and look at each of these sectors ourselves, the conclusion that we've come to is that it would represent a pretty significant dislocation to a system that operates very, very smoothly and in a very integrated manner, and that's going to imply costs for everybody across the system.
I mean, we on this show try to avoid politics as best we can. We like to focus on policy. We like to look at economics. This is such a file that you can't really separate the two. Is there a scenario when you crunch the numbers and you look at this in a way that with more detail than I think a lot of people have, is there a scenario here where you could see tariffs actually working, or is the damage just going to be so far and so wide and so many people involved that, you know, as they say, nobody ever wins in a trade war?
Okay. I'm going to qualify my comment with saying I'm not an expert in this, but theoretically, to the extent you put tariffs in place, there's going to be an initial disruption. Everyone will bear some sort of cost, even if you're bringing production back to the United States. Eventually, there will be some jobs created. Eventually, if a vehicle that was made in Germany or was made in Mexico is eventually made in Mexico, someone will benefit. But the fact of the matter is, between there and where we are today is going to be a pretty significant amount of disruption. And when we look at that initial disruption, we see almost everyone in that supply chain being damaged. Sooner or later, someone's going to get something that they did not have in the past. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of disruption between where we are today and getting to that point.
Well, it's some great insight. We're really glad you're able to come on the show. So thanks for doing this. Bruce Clark, Senior Vice President.
Thank you.
Moody's.